Hello everyone and welcome to this new video. Today, continuing our journey of learning about the history of psychology, we are going to look at a new current. We are going to analyze Gestalt, parallel to what was happening in America, which was seeing the birth of the science of behavior, as we have already analyzed in the past videos, and therefore we had moved from structuralism and functionalism to behaviorism. In Europe, especially in Germany, this new current of thought, precisely Gestalt, was developing. The foundation of this new current of thought, Gestalt, can be traced back to 1912, when a scholar, Max Wertheimer, a very great psychologist, published an article entitled Experimental Studies on Visual Motion Perception. In this article, Wertheimer goes on to analyze the famous phi phenomenon, which would be precisely that provoked phenomenon, that apparent movement caused by a series of visual stimuli put in succession, and the author introduces the idea that our mind operates on these sensory data by giving them a form, or Gestalt precisely. Gestalt translated means precisely form. In other words, just as these stimuli create the illusion of movement because they are very rapid and follow one quickly after another, what does our mind do? It sorts them into neat and precise patterns, also endowing them with meaning. This means that for Gestalt and all scholars who are part of this current of psychological thought, all psychic phenomena must be understood in terms of forms, that is, structured wholenesses. Thus, according to Gestalt, we do not perceive from the external world, through our senses, a sum of many elements, but a synthesis of reality. So from the external world we do not perceive, as I said, a sum of individual elements or individual perceptions, but instead we grasp the totality of things, the form of things, which has a different value, which is something more and has a different value than the sum of the individual parts. And that's where precisely the first difference arises that you can see, for example, with structuralism, which is that current of thought, which we've already analyzed in the past video and which you can catch up on here, that went to analyze the mind in every single aspect of it. That is, it separated the mind into all its variables, into all its parts, with the theory of elementism. Whereas Gestalt tends to look at the whole, as we said, of things, and that's where the famous phrase comes from that says that the whole is different from the sum of the individual parts. Obviously, most of the interest of these scholars is in phenomena and perceptual processes, and the immediate perception of the phenomenal world, which is also opposed from a learning point of view to what was the behaviorist theory of the time. According to behaviorists, in fact, learning problems were solved by the animal, for example, by a series of trial and error designed to achieve its goal, for example, to eat something. Instead, Gestalt proposes a criterion of explanation formed on thinking, understanding, and intuition. But if we go to analyze, for example, social psychology, Gestalt again comes into conflict with behaviorism, since behaviorism, in going to analyze people's behaviors in the social sphere, had inferred that all people move only if they have gratifications, and thus, for example, approval or praise. Whereas Gestalt proposes a different theory, that of attribution, according to which each of us moves in social following our emotions, feelings and intuitions, but also our motivations, goals and beliefs. But as I said before, the focus of attention for Gestalt is perception, and it is in the area of perception where these scholars made so many discoveries and had the best insights. So taking up this discussion of perception, our mind for Gestalt does what? It captures these sensory data and performs a kind of reprocessing. This unconscious process that the reprocessing mind performs is nothing more than a kind of grouping, synthesizing and stitching together all these visual stimuli. Wertheimer, as the daddy of this current of thought, tried to identify what are these principles that guide our mind in accomplishing these processes. These criteria then were also expanded upon by other Gestalt scholars and are still known today as Gestalt principles of grouping. Now we are going to go to examples also illustrated to understand what these principles are. Let's start with the principle of poignancy. For example, as you can see in this figure, we are led to see a cube whose vertices are surrounded by some black circles. In reality, no cube was drawn because it was enough to place black circles in strategic positions in which white lines were then drawn to give the geometric effect known to us precisely of the cube. This mechanism, as I said before, is called the principle of poignancy, according to which we tend to organize our perceptual field according to criteria of symmetry, regularity, and order. Then there is the principle of proximity. As you can see in this drawing, we tend to group neighboring elements together. For example, just in this drawing, we tend to see 3 spots on one side and 3 spots on the other side. So 2 groups of 3 spots each, and not, for example, 3 groups of 2 spots. The third example is that of the principle of similarity. As you can see in this drawing, we tend to group similar elements together. For example, in this case, since the similar elements are put in horizontal rows and not vertical, we will tend to say there is a row of hearts, a row of stars, and a row of hearts again. Then the closing principle, as you can see in the figure, these 2 geometric figures are drawn. Our eyes tend to go and add those missing parts and thus actually see a square and a circle, when in fact there is neither a circle nor a square because they are so many broken lines. Then there is the continuity principle. As you can see in the figure, we tend to see in this figure a straight line and a curved line intersecting the straight line. Actually, we don't tend to see so many semicircles and so many small lines because our eye performs this union and then makes us see the whole continuous line or the whole straight line. We then have another perceptual ability. For example, looking at this drawing, we can all see that there are 2 profiles of people with a black background, white with a black background, or we can perceive a kind of black cup with a white background. So the ability that we have is to extract the figure from the background, but it is not so immediate, this ability, but we can have a difficulty that by scholars is called fluctuating perception. That is just to understand whether it is the cup that is drawn and the white is the background, or the 2 white figures are drawn and the black is the background. Well, with all these examples that well illustrate the perceptual studies done by Gestalt, which, let us remember, is the current of thought that underlines the argument that the whole is different and has a completely different valence from the sum of its individual parts, my talk today is over. I bid you farewell. Thank you for your attention and see you next time.